Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and the game of Avowed to explore the World of Eora that these games are set in and appreciate the storytelling and the narrative that goes on in the game and just to dive into something geeky and nerdy that we all like, or just understand the lore of the world that these games are played in. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you on today. This is going to be a fun episode for me to do. This is the first dive into some lore that we see in Avowed, but also ties back to Pillars of Eternity. So I'm really excited to get into this. So because I am pre-recording this, a little bit earlier than I plan on updating it, there's not really a lot of news currently. In today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the Dawntreader quest and the associated lore behind that. Now, the reason I'm choosing the Dawntreader quest is because it was focused pretty heavily before the game came out as part of the PR for this game, and so there was already a lot of attention on it. We already knew a lot about it, so it wasn't something that was super surprising to a lot of people. As well, it is found in the first biome of the game, so a lot of people, I'm assuming, will have played this by then, or at least gotten into it a little bit. But if you are worried about having any spoilers for that quest in the first biome of Dawnshore, for this quest called Dawntreader, if you're worried about spoilers, then by all means feel free to jump off. I will give a little bit of a introduction to like some of the themes and topics that are discussed in Dawntreader, and so if you want to listen to those, and then I'll signpost you some other episodes you could listen to in the meantime, then by all means stick around for a little bit, and I'll give a little heads up when we're diving into a little bit more spoiler territory. But that's a heads up. We are going to be talking about that quest on today's episode. So with no news to talk about right now, I guess we may as well just kind of jump straight into the lore, and then after the lore, assuming depending on how much time this takes, I'll talk a little bit more about my impressions so far with the game now that I'm a little bit further along. But yeah, let's dive into today's episode focusing on the Dawntreader quest and associated lore.
I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So the topics that we're going to be covering in talking about the Dawntreader quest involve discussing the Free Expedition Corps and their connection to the Empire of Adir, and we're going to be heavily discussing the character of Sargamis, who is the central NPC of this quest, and what his character is about, what it is that he is trying to do. We're going to be discussing a little bit about animancy and the soul, and how all this kind of works, as well as we'll be talking about Eothas, the god, a little bit about his story and where he ends up. We're going to talk about an item called the Splinter of Eothas. We're going to read the item description for a unique weapon called Last Light of Day. And we'll be looking as well at the journal of the expedition leader, a couple letters that are found. We might even read from a book called Book of Verses, or the Eothasian Prayer, which is the scripture, or if, quote unquote, for Eothasian worshippers. And so there's a lot to cover, and those are the main things we're going to be talking about. We're also going to be talking about the nature of godlikes and some of the history of them as well. So those are all the topics that we're going to be touching on. If any of those sound like things that you maybe want to hold off on, then by all means, like I said, you feel free to jump off the episode, but we're going to dive into it. So you get the Dawntreader quest from Ulfric, which is a person that you can find in Paradis. He is associated with the expedition, the Free Expeditions Corps. This is a group of people that go out and essentially they explore the world, or in a mercenary sense, I guess. I don't know how to say it. They're like hired explorers, I guess, if you will. I haven't really done like a full deep dive on them yet. I need to learn a little bit more about them. But you talk to Ulfric, who is at the embassy in Paradis, which is in Dawnshore, and he's a bit worried about his brother because they had gone to this place called Pilgrim's Path. And his brother was there, and he's hasn't returned yet, so he's pretty worried about it. You can head to the Temple of Eothas on Pilgrim's Path to go and find his brother, and while you're there, you're going to learn about something else that's going on that, frankly, I find a little bit more interesting. On your way to the Temple of Eothas, which is where this quest takes place, you'll run into a person named Sedgwyn, who is essentially trying to bar you from getting into the Temple of Eothas because it has been closed off to the public because it's deemed dangerous. However, you do learn that Inquisitor Ludwine, who is the leader of the Steel Garrote, the paladin order that's in the area of Avowed, it has kind of tipped off Yeda, the person who is in charge of the expedition to explore this area. And so there's clearly an ulterior motive on Inquisitor Ludwine's part moving forward. If you want to learn more about Inquisitor Ludwine and the Steel Garrote, I've done episodes on them, and you can get a little bit of catching up as to who they are and what their faction is. But for the purposes of Avowed, the Steel Garrote, like I said, is a paladin order. They're one of the major factions in the narrative of this game. I'm guessing someone that you can ally with. They remind me a lot of Caesar's Legion in New Vegas in the sense that they are very clearly the bad guys, but I think you can still align with them. So that'll be interesting to see how that's going down the road. You enter into the Eothasian temple and very quickly realize that there's something else going on. You're first greeted with like this beautiful vista of an underground cavern and this underground lake, and I think Obsidian really went over the top to make this place look good, and it does look very good. Getting into the Eothasian temple, however, there is a voice in your head that remarks that something stirs here. Which is very interesting from a lore perspective, especially as we learn more about what this voice in your head even is, but that it's clearly detecting some sort of power here or that there's something unique or special within this area. Eventually, you get to the center of this whole place and you meet a person named Sargamis. And one of the things that you'll note about Sargamis right off the bat is that they almost look like a person touched by King Midas. They look like they have just this golden skin that they are covered in. And this is because Sargamis is what is referred to as an Eothas godlike. And godlike in the world of Eora, if you haven't already heard, and you would know if you play Avowed, and you probably would also know if you play Pillars of Eternity, you are essentially a person who is touched by one of the gods while you're in the womb of your mother. And so you're born with this weird physiological traits, you probably have some innate magical abilities, and your birth can be viewed as a blessing or a curse depending on the society you're in. Either way, you look really weird, and you kind of look like one of the gods, or at least aspect of one of the gods. Sargamis is an Eothas godlike, so he's been touched by the god Eothas, god of light and redemption and dawn and dusk, etc., etc. However, this isn't the first time that we've seen the name Sargamis appear in the lore for the World of Eora. In Pillars of Eternity 1, there is a book that we can read called Book of Verses. This is referred to as one of the main Eothasian scriptures, so, in the religions that follow the god Eothas, this would be one of their scriptures. It's a small volume of verses and psalms that they're essentially kind of like a Bible, and inside of that, there is one particular section that we can read in the Pillars of Eternity game, and Sargamis is brought in there. So I'm going to bring the Book of Verses here. We're going to read it, and I'm going to show you where Sargamis is mentioned. In the item description for Book of Verses, it's read as, "This small volume of verses and psalms is somewhat battered, suggesting it used to be carried by someone's person. The pages are dog-eared and worn, and the gold threads which form the title of the book have begun to fray. The book tends to open to a particular section where someone has marked a verse with a small blotch of ink." This book, by the way, is also acquirable in Avowed. It's not just in Pillars of Eternity. In fact, you can even pick it up somewhere in this temple. So this particular section of this book reads, "Aednung, the bright star, spoke, and her voice was like a clarion cry calling forth his soul. He knew her from the right hand of the shining god and was afraid. 'O wanderer, hear me,' she spoke. 'You are known to us, and your deeds put you far from salvation.' And he wept, for he knew that his sins lay bare before this great illumination. Then Sargamis spoke, and his voice swept forth with the heat and force of the bright day sun. 'Weep not, for the child of light has forgiveness even for you, if you will embrace him.' Harmkey knelt before them, then resolved to save himself and ask what he must do. And then Modigund spoke. Her voice was like the songbird's final hymn bidding farewell to the day's light. 'What darkness lies within you? you must cast into his light. Your sins will be burned from you until you are newly formed, reborn into his keeping. So spoke Modagund, but Eanund warned him, saying, You have walked all these years into darkness and must now return. You will find the path like treading fire, and at every step you will be tempted to turn away, but no harm will come to you if you keep your faith. So this is very clearly a part of this book that is depicting this person who has kind of wandered away from the path of righteousness, if you will. And these three figures that are important to the Eothasian iconography and symbolism appear and speak to this person named Harmke, who has fallen from grace, essentially. And these people convict him of his sin, then let him know that there is a way to, there is an offer of repentance, essentially, but warn him that it is going to be painful to do so, but ultimately is probably the best thing for him. Now you'll notice, though, halfway through, it says here, Then Sargamis spoke, and his voice swept forth with the heat and force of the bright day sun. Weep not, for the child of light has forgiveness, even for you, if you will embrace him. Now, when we saw the Dawntreader quest before the game officially released, it seemed like there was this kind of hint that Sargamis perhaps took this name and actually just kind of like named himself after this thing, this name, because he refers to himself as the Oracle, but he calls himself Sargamis when you meet him. And so if you have the arcane scholar background in Avowed, your character can mention like, oh, you named yourself after this important figure within Eothasian theology. And Sargamis actually replies to you that it actually is him, that he is actually Sargamis. Now, this is a really important spot because when I first read this book, I interpreted these three characters, Eadnung, Sargamis, and Modagund, as the three people that represent the Dawn Stars, because Eothas manifests in the world as a multiplicity of different things, one of which is the Dawn Stars, which is described as these three figures. And so I kind of always interpreted Eadnung, Sargamis, and Modagund as the Dawn Stars, which was a manifestation of the god Eothas. And to some degree, even if it turns out that Eadnung, Sargamis, and Modagund are not actual divine, manifestations, but they are just like these envoys, if you will, of the god Eothas himself, in a sense that is kind of still a manifestation because Eothas created them in his image and they are out there being his eyes and ears, as Sargamis likes to say. And so to a certain extent, they are kind of a manifestation, but not in the way I was originally thinking. But either way, this person, Sargamis, is a key figurehead within the theology of Eothas worship and religion. We come to learn by talking with Sargamis that he is, in fact, he's very, very old. And you're warned as such by Caedmon, the brother of the person who sent you here to investigate if he was okay. Caedmon basically says that Sargamis is very old, and not just old like elf old, because elves can get old in this world, but he's really old. And you find out that he's, 630-something years old. He essentially was birthed the same day that the Aedir Empire was created. And I don't think that's by accident. Like, I'm pretty sure Obsidian did that on purpose because there's something significant about Aedir being created and Sargamis being born. But I don't have enough information or speculation to dive into what that may or may not imply. But either way, Sargamis is very old. He's as old as the very empire that you serve as an envoy of in the game of Avowed. You learn that he had some involvement with wars within the Dyrwood, such as the War of Black Trees, the War of Defiance, and the war before that was the Broken Stone War. He had a very strong influence or presence within those wars, generally as a healer, but also proselytizing people. He was in the Dyrwood at the time, and this all happened prior to Pillars of Eternity 1. He was in the Dyrwood because he was actually exiled from the Empire of Aedir for proselytizing in the Colclan Woods. And this is pretty significant because the Colclan Woods would have been one of the major areas of the Aedirian Empire. That's where the elven half of that society originated from, because the Aedir Empire is this mixture of humans and elves coming together. There was a human society and elven society. The elves lived in the Colclan Forest, and they used to be at war with each other, but then they eventually kind of came to an agreement and formed the nation of Aedir together. But the origination of the elves was the Colclan Woods. Now, Sargamis would have gone into these woods and tried to proselytize people into his religion that is following Eothas, and it seems that he was exiled from the very nation of Aedir for doing so. which implies a couple of interesting things about the nature of other religions and faiths within the Aedirn Empire, perhaps just the elves themselves, and their views on Eothas. The Aedirn Empire primarily worship Boudica, a goddess of rightful rulership and justice and law. Don't get that twisted, though. It sounds like one of the positive good gods, but I would personally categorize Boudica as one of the more evil gods if you had to categorize them at all. So Sargamis, he eventually, I guess, comes to the Living Lands at some point, and he sets up this Temple of Eothas in these godless ruins. And we know that he did this because he mentions that people used to come to this temple, all sorts of godlikes used to come to this temple to seek refuge from their troubled life, because living life as a godlike can be very troublesome. Even if it's considered a gift, a lot of people look at your gift as something that you are responsible for using for the betterment of the people around you. And if it's viewed as a curse, well, you're pretty much oppressed your entire life and possibly even killed. And so for these godlikes to have this refuge where they can come and seek peace and quiet and connect with their deities that helped make them, even though they might not necessarily follow them religiously, this is part of the purpose that Sargamis's Temple of Eothas was for. And we also see this in some of the lore. There is a note that you can pick up, which I had a screenshot for, but it did not synchronize to the cloud, and I can't seem to access it for some reason, so I can't read it right now. But essentially, we find that there was a wall godlike. Wall is one of the other gods of this world. And there was a wall godlike who came to this place to do that very thing, to have a moment of refuge, to learn about the idea behind grace. And so it seems that that was part of the purpose behind this temple existing, was that Sargamis wanted other godlikes like him and from other deities to have this place of refuge. However, the Eothas temple is not a very popular place to go, especially given the events of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and any of the things that we know about the god Eothas. The god Eothas is generally looked at as one of the good gods, if you're categorizing good and evil, god of light and redemption and dawn and dusk and, second chances and all that. He should be by definition, especially if you read his scripture like the Eothasian prayer book, he looks like he should be a god that is a good god, and yet he is responsible for the death of numerous amounts of people. I don't even know how much. I wouldn't know how to estimate it, if it was thousands, 10,000s, hundreds of thousands, but lots of people died because of Eothas's followers, and even to a degree, Eothas himself. Now, I'm not going to dive into the specifics of why and how, because that has to do with spoilers related to Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and I want people who might be new to that game to experience those narratives for himself. But regardless, Eothas and his followers are not necessarily viewed very positively in the world of Eora. In the first game, there was a person who led a war and a crusade against another nation in the name of Eothas, and a lot of people died, and it looked like he was even empowered by Eothas, and so that was a pretty important thing that has to do with Saint Widwin and Widwin's legacy, if you want to read up or listen more on that. And then in the Deadfire, he apparently was trudging around, eating people's souls up and yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to get into details, but a lot of people have died across a couple of different instances in history. And so as a result, not a lot of people really come to the Eothas Temple anymore. For good reason, too, because even if they wanted to, it might be something that they receive a lot of persecution for. And so Sargamis has kind of fallen into this purposelessness, but, he still would have had his connection with his god. However, as you read Sargamis's journal and you read other notes that are going on between him and another person named Niall, you learn pretty quickly that Sargamis seems to have lost his connection to his god, and he is incredibly desperate to get it back, but nothing has ever worked. Even in the past, when he was connected to the god Eothas, it was very much a one-sided conversation, which Sargamis actually notes when you talk to him directly. But now there doesn't even seem to be that one-way conversation, and it's something that has kind of robbed him of his purpose in life. His whole life he has been a follower of Eothas. He's been connected to his god. He's been trying to serve these people in different ways, and now here he is seemingly abandoned by his god after his deity is responsible for how many people across the world dying. He's a man who's undergoing a crisis of faith, especially one who's been living for centuries, on the better half side of a millennia at this point. What is this man to do? What is this godlike person to even do? Well, we learn later on in the game, and I'm not going to spoil this too much, but there is a letter written to a man named Vitor that you can read in the area of the Emerald Stair. And essentially, it's a note from Sargamis to this animancer. And an animancer is someone who studies the soul, the stuff that souls are made of, which is essence. So they're a scientist in the sciences of the soul. And it seems that Sargamis was kind of lost and didn't know what to do. But then when he learned a little bit of animancy from this person named Vitor, it gave him this renewed passion and drive towards a project, something that he could put his whole person towards doing. As you play through the quest of Dawntreader, you learn what that purpose is. But before we dive into the details of what that purpose is, let's take a sidestep and look at some other lore that we see within this quest before we finish that off.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
Some other things that I think are worth noting that you have within this quest of Dawntreader. There is a few things of note. One that I think is very interesting is a letter to Karlodh. This is a letter that you can find on a corpse, and it's written to a person named Karlodh from someone else. And I've always found this one interesting because it references the Harbingers, which is a faction that we see in Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. And I like to think that it might imply that there might be a returning character later in the game, although I can't really know for sure. The note itself is written, Karlodh, I can find no more use to put my talents in our pitiless land, so I must go. The water freezes, I create art from it. The water melts, my art dissolves. The water freezes again. This cycle once brought me peace. I looked upon my work and was comforted by its impermanence, and the impermanence of all things. I took comfort in Remirgon's promise of the end. But even the ice carver is not impervious to the cold, and the new wind that blows from the north, from Ukaizo, from the cracks in the in-between, chills me to my bones. There is something wrong with the world, Loda, and not even your bright smile can set this cycle to rights. I head to the living lands. The vitality that fled my art is gathering there, condensing. Now, a new chill rises in the land. A great conflict is coming, and our master will need his harbingers at his side. So this is a note written from one person to another person named Karlodh, and they are part of the Harbingers, and they're essentially followers of the god Remirgon, who is the god of entropy, cold, death and finality, and simple bad luck, amongst other things. I definitely usually classify him as an evil god, but he's probably actually the most neutral of anybody. Now, people who follow Remirgon worship this idea of the finality of all things. They view the cycle of reincarnation that this world operates on as kind of a bad thing, because the whole world is spiraling towards an inevitable, total, final end of absolutely everything, and the cycle of reincarnation is kind of antithetical to that because people are, cycling through, even if they believe that it'll end one day. So that's why this is referred here is they have this water that freezes, and then they make art, probably some form of an ice sculpture, but then the art melts away when the water melts. And this idea of impermanence would be something that a follower of Remirgon would view positively, which is why they view their art melting as a positive thing. A new chill rises in the land. A great conflict is coming, and our master will need his harbingers at his side. And so this new chill, I'm guessing, refers to is the Dream Scourge. That's the great conflict that's coming, and their master, which could mean either the master of the Harbingers, which would probably be the wonderful endings godlike that we get to actually have as a companion in the game of Vatnir, who I would love to see in this game, or it might even mean Remirgon, the very god themselves, which means that this great conflict might actually be oppositional to Remirgon, which it was a really interesting idea, especially considering some of the things I've learned about the Dream Scourge at this point in time in my playthrough. But this is one letter I definitely like because it references other characters and it points to other lore. Another piece of lore that we can look at, I'm not going to read in its entirety because it's a little bit long, but this is Yeda's journal, and it's Gjeda, and that's just a Diran spelling of Yeda. You can read this item by picking it up in this Temple of Eothas, and it has several dates on it. So there's 3 pre-autumn 2830, and so that's the 3rd of pre-autumn, which is like early autumn in the year 2830. It continues on to into the season of pre-Verno, which I believe is pre-winter, goes into Tari-Verno, and then into pre-Prima, which I think that's more of a springtime. Yeah, so that should be early spring in the year 2831, which is, interestingly enough, around the time that Avowed starts in, or at least that opening cinematic refers to the time as spring 2831. In reading this journal, we learn that Yeda, who is the leader of this expedition group that's been hired by Inquisitor Ludwig to investigate the Temple of Eothas, you can see in the first few entries a little bit about her personality, and she very clearly prioritizes work above her family and thinks that it's going to bite her in the butt later on the road, but whatever, she's going to go for it. In the latter couple of entries, though, we definitely see a decline in her mental stability, and it seems very clear, or at least as Finney is very not subtly hinting to the idea that she has the Dream Scourge. And that's part of the reason that she led her officers into ruin into this temple, is because she wasn't really thinking clearly. The last piece of lore that I want to look at before we return to the end of what happens with Sargamis in this quest is an item called Clay Tablet. And I'm going to be talking about this Clay Tablet again because I think it's very important, but it touches on some really spoiler-heavy stuff for the other Pillars games, so I'm not going to talk about it quite yet. Maybe next episode or the one after that for those who want to have more of the old Pillars lore talked about. But for now, I do want to bring your attention to it. This clay tablet is inscribed with a flowing vertical script in a language you've never seen before. And then it reads something that I can't pronounce. It's like Yul Hazizha Yezuha Yezuda Merega and I can't read it, so I'm not going to bother doing it, embarrassing myself. I think this is a very important thing to pay attention to. So like if you haven't done this quest yet, or you're about to, or you can go back there, like take a screenshot of this thing, or you can just find it on the internet, because that's what I'm doing, and pay attention to it, especially in conjunction with the History of the Living Lands anthology set. There are 5 volumes of the History of Living Lands that you can find in the Temple of Eothas, and these allude to something really big, at least as far as I'm concerned, within the lore, about who the Godless are, this group of people that lived in the Living Lands a long time ago, what their connection is to the Living Lands, and their connection to other factions within the world at large, and the Ingwithans, which we talked about in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. There's a lot going on here that could be alluded to, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. I think that's a different episode worthy of looking at on its own. And so those are the 3 main things I want to look at, was the clay tablet, the letter to Karlodh, and Yeda's journal. That person who led their expedition to ruin because she was kind of troubled with the Dream Scourge. And you find Yeda and the corpses of her expedition crew deep in the lab of where Sargamis was working. You kind of discover that Sargamis was actually behind them dying. Although dying is not necessarily the correct term for what happened to them necessarily. As you continue going through the Dawntreader quest, eventually you pick up the Splinter of Eothas, which is the thing that Sargamis asked you to go fetch for him because he needs it to activate this giant statue that he has created at the center of this entire temple. And so, out of a sense of morbid curiosity, I'm sure that's exactly what us players did. Now we go and find the Splinter of Eothas, we fight a boss, and we return back to Sargamis to talk to him about everything that we've learned and what he plans on doing. What he plans on doing is taking this Splinter of Eothas and using it as a tether, essentially, to the god Eothas, because Eothas apparently has a deep connection to this splinter. And he is going to try to force Eothas to put his self, if you were, his essence, into the statue, and then Eothas will be stuck inside this statue. And essentially what Sargamis is planning to do with Eothas is to take the souls, the essence of the expedition crew that he found, and implant their consciousness into this statue alongside Eothas, if you will. And if I understand correctly what it is Sargamis is talking about, essentially he is trying to force Eothas to have the consciousness, the moral consciousness of regular man. The idea being that when he has that consciousness suffused with his personhood, he will then feel the true weight of his immoral actions and the deaths of all the people that he has caused. And only then will the god of Eothas be redeemed himself, the god of redemption being properly redeemed by his people, by his very godlike that he kept alive for all these centuries. This is, as Sargamis, as far as he's concerned, his grand final act, because now that he has been disconnected from the god Eothas, he can feel himself dying of the very old age that he is at. And so he thinks this is going to be the last thing that he does. And so obviously he's got a nothing to lose mentality about it. You bring the Splinter of Eothas to him, which he reveals to you actually comes from the god titan that Eothas used to have. And you can actually see this too in the item description if you read it. It reads, a brittle shard of shin bone purportedly chiseled from the skeleton of Eothas's god titan, which remains interred at Moaguieth in Ukaizo. Now, what that's referring to are these massive titans that the gods used to walk around in. Apparently, that's what they used to do. When the gods were, a long time ago, wandering around the world, they had these giant titanic bodies that they wandered around the globe of Eora in. And then at a certain point, they decided, none of that. We're going to go non-corporeal, baby. And they decided to basically go into the beyond, where they were at a distance, at an arm's length from the rest of the world. And they sacrificed their titan bodies to be able to do this. But this splinter of Eothas is apparently chiseled from the shin bone of the skeletons of Eothas' god Titan. So it has an innate connection to Eothas. And Sargamis says that he's kind of used it before to be able to talk with Eothas directly. Again, a little one-sided, but it's still there. It's a very interesting little piece of lore because it implies that Sargamis knows a lot about the world of Eora on a deep, fundamental level that a lot of players in the game won't necessarily know. And a lot of people in the world definitely do not. And so it's I would personally love to get to talk to Sargamis more about what he does and does not know, but unfortunately you only get to talk to him so much because he's very focused on this one thing he's trying to do. And what he needs you to do now, assuming you're going with him at this point, is you insert the splinter of Eothas, you activate the machine to try to turn the statue on, for lack of a better word. It doesn't work. The statue doesn't fill with the essence and godhood of Eothas. And so him trying to figure out what to do at the last second, he kind of realizes that what needs to happen is there needs to be a chime. Now, a chime is not like a dinner bell chime or anything like that. A chime is a metaphysical concept. It's essentially the thing that makes a godlike turn into a godlike. When the gods touch a fetus in the womb that turns it into a godlike, what they're actually doing is implanting their chime in them, if you will. I almost like to think of it as like some sort of resonance that changes their very physiology and metaphysical being. And it's these chimes that determine what kind of godlike you will be. And so Sargamis says that we need to have the chime of a godlike instilled into this statue if it is to any way attract the god Eothas into this place. And Sargamis has been doing a lot of work here. You can read some correspondence between him and a person named Niall to try to basically fund this project and get all the things needed to do it. So he's been studying animancy pretty deeply, and he's 600-something years old. So he pretty much has it figured out, he thinks. But this is the last step that he figures needs to happen for the contraption to work. The first thing he does is ask you to contribute your soul, because you are a godlike. Now, there's a few things at this point that can happen depending on how you handle the situation. One, you can kind of refuse, do what he wants you to do, and then he's like, okay, he basically wants to forcibly take your soul from you, so he's going to try to kill you, quote unquote, and then reap your soul from your body and put it in the machine. So that's one thing that can happen, which leads to combat. Another thing you do is you could actually just volunteer your soul. You can be like, yeah, totally, let's do it. And then you sacrifice your soul to the power up the machine, and you will get a game over screen because that does kill you. Obsidian will kill you for making choices like that. And I love that option is pretty much there. Now, the other two options involve convincing him to use his soul since he is an Eothas godlike and you are not. In which case he will then go to the machine and put his soul into it and die as a result, or at least, his body will be soulless and so be dead as a result. And that's one scenario. The final scenario is to basically convince him that this isn't going to work, it's stupid, don't try it at all. And so he becomes discouraged and instead tries to seek to counsel the people of the living lands with whatever wisdom he has left before he dies. And those are the four main outcomes that I understand it to be anyways to do that. I convinced him that he should sacrifice his soul, and he did, and it was great. I didn't have to fight him at all. And that's the end of the Dawntreader quest. Now, when you defeat or convince him to kill himself, or you convince him to not do anything, you get the sword that he has called Last Light of Day. This is a unique sword, and one thing that's really interesting about it is, one, the way it's designed. It has a lot of Eothasian iconography on it, but also it's on fire, which makes it pretty cool. But being a unique item within the world of Eora, that means that it also has a unique item description, which oftentimes will tell us a little stories about the world of Eora, give us some lore, and things like that. When you open up the Last Light of Day in the inventory menu, you can read the following item description. The lavish extravagance of this blade belies its wicked lethality. It was crafted for an Eothasian paladin of the Order of Kind Wayfarers as a thanks by a blacksmith whose life was saved by the paladin. Rumor has it that never once did this paladin ever draw a last light of day from its scabbard, settling every conflict through diplomacy. When they finally reached the end of their long life, they were buried along with this sword, which had yet to draw blood. How and when the weapon made its way to Sargamis' hands is unknown, but from the notches on the blade, it had almost certainly seen use well before that happened. And so there we have a little bit of lore about this sword and its origin. It says here that it was crafted for an Eothasian paladin, paladins being martial zealots, usually forming around an idea, a philosophy, or a deity, and they were of the order of kind wayfarers. Kind wayfarers are exactly what they sound like. They are wayfarers who are kind to people. Like this person never even took his sword out of his scabbard. He talked everyone down, and that's what this paladin was like. Kind wayfarers are basically to go around the world and do good to everybody. I've done episodes on paladins, and so you can learn a little bit of the kind wayfarers there if you're interested. And yeah, a kind wayfarer talking down using diplomacy to solve problems is very much a kind wayfarer way of doing things, rather than pulling out your super fire sword that you could use to intimidate people. Even if he didn't use it to hurt people, even just to intimidate people, you'd think would be effective. But that's not really the kind wayfarer way of doing things. That would definitely be a little bit more in line with a lot of the other paladin orders that we see. Just a little bit of lore about the last light of day weapon that you can pick up here. And that is the Dawntreader quest in its totality. So hopefully I didn't spoil too much for you. I mean, I did spoil the whole quest for you, but hopefully there was nothing else in there that you didn't want to know. I'm pretty sure there wasn't. I was very careful around that. But yeah, that's the whole thing. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Now that is over, let's do some concluding stuff before closing up the episode.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
If I don't talk a lot about Pillars of Eternity lore, usually I'll put a little segment here to say, how does this tie into Pillars of Eternity lore? But throughout the episode, we kind of touched back on that, whether it was like looking at the kind wayfarer paladin order, or talking about some of the Eothasian scripture that we get from the first Pillars of Eternity game, or even the idea of the gods having titan bodies. A lot of this lore ties back to Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2. And so if you haven't played those games yet, I highly recommend playing them. But just so you know, they are really long and they're much different than Avowed. So don't walk in expecting something more of the same. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's been a really fun episode for me to make. I'm going to be transparent with you guys listening. This is new territory for me. I'm not sure how to play the game, do research, and then also report to you guys a good episode about lore-based stuff in a way that keeps up with what you guys are doing and playing in the game, but also is being consistent with learning. You know, I was ready to do this episode, and then I found that letter to Vitor about how Sargamis found animancy and started dedicating himself to his newest passion projects. And so it's like, I might learn new lore as we go, and I might come back with another episode saying like, hey, you know that thing I said a couple episodes ago? Yeah, I was wrong about a couple things, and here's why. So I hope you'll be patient with me as we like venture through a lot of this stuff together, and I appreciate your support and patience. If there is anything else that you learn further on in the game that you think I should know in relation to this episode, please send me an email, worldofaora@gmail.com. Don't worry about doing spoilers for me. I mean, don't spoil things just to spoil things if you can help it, but I have fully accepted that by having this podcast, I might have the game spoiled for me, and I kind of already have, in a way, but I'm not going to talk about that here. Before closing out, I'll give a couple more thoughts on the game and how I'm enjoying it. I am still really enjoying the game. It's a lot of fun. I'm loving the combat still, even though I've largely just kind of grown into this one character build this whole time. And I'm very interested in trying some other things out, which unfortunately does kind of lead me to my first major gripe with the game, which is that I feel very pigeonholed into my current character build. Because as I have kind of learned, it's really important to keep upgrading your weapons and armor if you want new unique weapons that you pick up to scale with the kind of things that you're holding on to. So, for example, if you want to have unique weapons that are of exceptional quality, you need to have already exceptional quality items equipped on your person, or at least in your inventory. One of the two, I don't remember which one. Which means you really have to be investing in upgrading at least one item that you're going to be holding on to a bunch. But I've found that a lot of the upgrade materials I use is enough to keep up with 2 loadouts, and that's pretty much it. So now at this point, if I wanted to stop doing my arquebus / grimoire and melee weapon build, and let's say I want to do something like a 2-handed melee, or I want to dual wield wands, I would have to either get a quality tier below what I currently have, and then spend a lot of upgrades that I don't yet have to upgrade those to a better quality. But then I wouldn't be able to upgrade my my newer stuff to a higher tier, which would definitely help me out in tougher combat scenarios. The alternative thing I could do is wait until I pick up a unique item, which would scale to where I'm at in terms of quality, but I can't know when I'm going to find those unique items, and it might not be a weapon that I'm interested in. And furthermore, if I decide to respec my character's abilities, then I have to make sure that I put some of those spec points into the abilities that are correlated with weapons that I am currently using. And so I don't really fully respec in that sense, because it would be a waste to invest, you can do extra damage with these weapons when I can't get a weapon that's of the same quality. I don't know. Perhaps I'm approaching the combat and the upgrading and the character build wrong. Maybe I have this idea in my head that it has to be upgraded to keep up with things when really it's just fine. That's one thing where I whether or not it's true, I as a player, I have felt kind of pigeonholed, and I'm sure other players have as well. Now, that being said, I'm still really having fun with my current character build. Like right now, I'm basically playing a sniper who has a backup magic book to whenever things get hairy and a little too close combat. But yeah, I'm really enjoying shooting things with an arquebus. I shot a sporling the other day to see how far I could launch it off a cliff, and it flew so far into the map that the character actually despawned from sight, like it unloaded. And so I don't actually know where the character landed. It's been a lot of fun. As far as exploration goes, this is something I've really been liking, and I posted this on Reddit recently, is that I can't walk 60 seconds in any direction without running into something. And personally speaking, I think that is pretty stellar, that this game can be so dense with interesting encounters or loot, or just something to pick up or investigate or be a part of. But at the same time, it doesn't feel overly dense. It doesn't feel like I'm tripping over things constantly. It feels like I'm finding these things organically. And so Obsidian's done a really great job of knocking that out of the park. Before we sign off, I am just going to read the letter to Vitor that Sargamis wrote him, and that'll be the reading of the day. And so this is a letter from Sargamis to a person called Master Vitor, and it reads, Master Vitor, I have only had your device running for a few days, but I felt I must write to him immediately and thank you for your generosity in sharing your plans and materials lists with me. As you can infer from the tardiness of my correspondence, it took me several months to source the necessary supplies, and another at least to put them all together, and in the end your design came together flawlessly. Your tutelage these last 3 years has given me cause to dream for the first time in decades. It will not burden you with the fulsome intensity of my feelings, but I must tell you, even before my Lord God left the world, I felt there was a hole in my life, a yearning for discovery, a project worthy of wholly subsuming my mind beneath. And I see now that it is animancy. I would never have pursued this path were it not for our chance meeting at that crossroads. As my labors near their end, the only words I have left now are thank you. Thank you, Vitor, for giving me this aged godlike hope. I shall ever be your grateful student, Sargamis. And that's everything for today. Thanks, everyone. If you liked today's episode, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, or follow me on Twitter @worldofeora. If you want to support the show directly, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. I don't expect anyone to do so like out of obligation. It's just there for those who find value in supporting the shows that they like. If you have suggestions for topics, if you have any sort of updates on things that I may haven't run into yet, send me an email, let me know. If you want to have a conversation about Avowed or Pillars of Eternity or any games that you're into right now, let me know. I love having conversations about that stuff. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. I hope it was a good one for you. I'll see you guys next week with a new episode. I'm not sure what that one is going to be yet. I'm thinking about touching on the Living Lands history books that I had mentioned earlier in correspondence with the Clay Tablet. I'm thinking of also talking about the totems between Woodica and Skane and all the other ones that we get from different biomes. There's a bunch of different topics that we could touch on, but I don't want it to be too specific, but I also don't want to be too broad. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm your host, Eric, a.k.a. Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.